You make this argument about a colorblind America. What does colorblind mean to you?
My version of colorblindness is not the I don't see race version. It's sure, you see race, I see race, but let's try our best not to treat each other differently.
Why are you negating my color? Why are you negating what I look like? Of course you're not saying people don't see race or ethnicity.
It's actually race neutrality. It's trying your best not to treat people without regard to race. It's the heart of the civil rights movement. The question is, how do you identify who needs the help and who doesn't? Race by itself is not even close to the best proxy for that.
The most disadvantaged are usually people of color, and especially black people, when it comes to all aspects of society, including criminal justice, etc.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure when you get to the bottom of the ladder, I'm not sure it's a competition.
There are media organizations that won't invite you on. Why not? Hello everyone, thanks for tuning in. I am Don Lemon. Of course, I'm joined today by Coleman Hughes. He's an author, he's a podcaster, he is the host and political commentator with CNN, his work really centers around complexity of racial identity. His book, The End of Race Politics, Arguments for a Colorblind America, is out everywhere. Coleman, thank you. I appreciate you being here.
Good to be here, Don.
I'm glad that you're here because I think that I find us to be similar in our views on things. Sometimes I feel like I don't have a home. Other times I do. Do you ever feel that way, considering the work that you do and the response that you've gotten from your latest book?
Absolutely, yeah. I've identified a lot with the politically homeless in many ways because lots of what I say about race resonates with a more right-wing audience. Yet I don't view myself as a right-wing person. Like the totality of my politics is very moderate, and I take things on an issue-by-issue basis. So there are some topics that I'm going to sound much more liberal, others I'm going to sound much more conservative, and that makes me politically homeless in a day and age where you're supposed to be down the line Democrat, down the line Republican.
Yeah. I want to talk about the book. It's called, again, The End of Race Politics, Arguments for a Colorblind America. What do you mean? What is colorblind? You make this argument about a colorblind America. What does colorblind mean to you?
So what colorblind means to me is just that you try your best to treat people without regard to race. And it's not that you don't notice race. It's not that you don't see race, because we all see race, certainly as adults growing up in America, where we're sensitized to pay attention to race. There's no use pretending you don't see race, and so my version of colorblindness is not the I don't see race version. It's sure, you see race, I see race, but let's try our best not to treat each other differently on that basis, and let's also ask the state not to treat us differently on that basis. Wherever the state has an interest in correcting disadvantage, let's do that on the basis of socioeconomics.
Okay, so then why use that term then? That's I did wonder that. It was like, because you said class is a better place for judgment in society, or for a better place to look at inequities in society.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Then why use the term colorblind and not call it, an awareness of class instead of using the term colorblind?
Well, there's two parts to it. One is also in our personal lives. I don't think people should be treating people on the basis of race. The word race neutral is to me a synonym. So colorblind, race neutral, whatever word you want to use. But I think really what people mean when they use the word colorblind is generally what I'm saying. And I think it has been misconstrued to mean, oh, I don't see race. It's been easy to dismiss on that basis, when really it's a philosophy going all the way back to Wendell Phillips just after the Civil War, who was the first to use the term colorblind. And he took over the American Anti-Slavery Society from William Lloyd Garrison and said, we need a colorblind government, and proposed the 13th and 14th Amendments. So he's the first to use that word, and I'm trying to rescue it from the misinterpretations of it that I feel have cropped up over the past 10, 20 years.
Why do you think it's misinterpreted? Because I remember that term growing up, and people, especially people of color, obviously took offense to it because they said, why are you negating my color? Why are you negating what I look like? Of course, you're not saying people don't see race or ethnicity, correct?
Correct. So I think that some people have taken the word colorblind to mean that, and as a result have dismissed it completely, when in reality it's actually race neutrality. It's trying your best not to treat people without regard to race. It's the heart of the civil rights movement.
I think it's the same thing as or similarly, people have co-opted the word woke, right? Woke usually means to be aware of inequities in society so that we don't repeat them. And now it has become a term that is used mostly by the right as an insult to people of color and to people who want to bring light to inequities. And should that word be rescued? Should the word woke be rescued?
It's a good question. If someone were to do it compellingly, I think it would be very powerful. So the reason I'd rather not run away from the word colorblind, I'd rather run into the fire, because I think that's actually the way that you can break open a conversation. So if someone were to, for instance, take the word woke and say, this word has been trashed, it's been misunderstood, here's what it really means, and then were to make a compelling argument, I think that would get a lot of people's attention and be a good intervention in the conversation. So rather than run away from the term that has been maligned, I chose to run into it.
Well, I mean, there are other words. I mean, the N-word has been maligned, of course, and
I think we can agree colorblind and woke are not quite the same as the N-word.
Yeah, I know, but there are people, members of the rap, rap and hip hop folks have said, we're changing the narrative. We're going to change the definition of what it means what the N-word means. We're going to say it to diffuse it, to take the power away from it. Do you agree with that? Is there a comparison between that and colorblind?
I don't know if there is a comparison. So I think when rappers say the N-word, most of them with a soft A at the end, most of them grew up referring to that, thoughtlessly saying that word amongst friends. And even, at this point, the N-word with a soft A has become an almost all-purpose, non-white inner city term where you can go to Queens and see groups of Hispanics and Asians that literally grow up saying the N-word, like when they're 12 years old, organically in their friend groups. And that can become a problem later when people don't understand the context they grew up in and that they're not using that word, and they're not intending offense with the word. But I don't know how much of it is a conscious reclaiming of the word so much as that's just the vernacular that so many rappers organically grow up with.
Yeah, but you're consciously reclaiming the word. The reason I brought it up is because you said you're consciously reclaiming the term.
Yes, mine is a very conscious effort to reclaim a term that I think is a good term and is misunderstood.
So there's a difference, I believe, in colorblind, being so-called colorblind in your personal life, than as it relates to public policy. And the way people are treated in business and in government and in society. Like being colorblind in your personal life, you marry who you want, you're friends with who you want, but that's not necessarily the way the system operates. So is there that distinction for you?
Yes, absolutely there is. So I try to make both cases. I think most people, like you, find the second case more controversial than the first. Many people would agree, sure, let's try our best to be colorblind in our personal lives. Let's try our best not to treat people according to their race or differently according to their race. But when it comes to the state has a compelling interest in race-based public policy to ameliorate past wrongs or to combat the effects of modern systemic discrimination. And my view is that we can all agree, outside from probably the most doctrinaire libertarians, the rest of the political spectrum can agree that the state has an interest in correcting for disadvantage, which is to say, some of us are born upper middle class homes like I was, 2 parents in the home, both college educated, helping me with my homework over my shoulder, no crime, no temptation to join a gang in my community because there was no gang, so forth, no fentanyl crisis in my community. And others are born on the other end of all of these things, shuttling between foster homes, avoiding avoiding countless disadvantages. And the government has an interest where it can in trying to bridge the gap between those, to make the second kind of kid, to give the second kind of kid a little bit of a leg up along the way. And the question is, how do you identify who needs the help and who doesn't? And my view is that the best way to do that, the best proxy for that kind of disadvantage, is class, is socioeconomics. It's income, it's wealth. It could also, you can get clever with it, like the SAT adversity score a few years ago, and take what was the level of crime in the neighborhood you grew up with. This is relevant too. You can get as clever as you want, but race by itself is not even close to the best proxy for that.
Why not,
so
why not both?
In principle, you could. In principle, you could do both, but the status quo in American public policy right now is to just use race as a proxy for disadvantage. That's basically the premise of much of our public policy.
Well, you don't think that's the most obvious of the disadvantage, especially
no.
Considering
Certainly
the history of the country, and you don't think that's the most obvious? Because there are poor whites and poor blacks, but when you look at...
When you say obvious,
yeah,
it may be the most obvious because slavery and Jim Crow, et cetera, but it's actually not the most correlated with what we really mean. So for example, I'm a descendant of slaves, I'm a person of color, I'm black and Hispanic. I grew up upper middle class. I grew up in a town with a lot of other upper middle class black people too. And so what we talk about when we talk about disadvantage, we're not talking about what I grew up with. That, like, I'm not the person that needs help. So if we're having race-based public policy, that would identify me as someone that is in the realm of really the disadvantage. Whereas my argument is that it's rather common sense at this point. You've got, yes, black people are more likely to be poor, Hispanics more likely to be poor. You still got tens of millions of poor white people. You know, you've got every permutation under the sun. So why not use class and socioeconomics as the way to view who is disadvantaged? That's you're capturing more closely who actually needs the help and who doesn't.
I understand what you're saying, but I think when I said it's the most obvious, it's also probably the biggest, the thing that makes the most, it has the most distinction in our society. Considering the history of the country, again, there are poor white people and poor black people. But among the people who are most disadvantaged, the most disadvantaged are usually people of color, and especially black people, when it comes to all aspects of society, including criminal justice, etc.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure when you get to the bottom of the ladder. I'm not sure it's a competition. It's
not a competition, but I mean, it's reality. It's not a competition.
Well, it just depends what you're talking about. If you're talking about criminal justice, then you're going to talk about mostly black communities. If you're going to talk about high suicide rates, you're going to talk about mostly white communities. If you're talking about, I mean, you can slice this in many different ways, and I think when you get to a certain level of despair and disadvantage, it's not really useful to compare which group has it worse, because we're talking about, I mean, there are counties in America that are mostly white counties that have life expectancies that are developing world level, which is to say not first world level.
Well, part of
helping,
when you want to help anyone of any group, you look at the problems, and that's worse, right? When you're talking about disadvantages, you're not talking about things that are good. You're talking about the worst aspects of anything, of human nature, of treatment of people, of how, government, of the state, as you call it. You're talking about the worst aspects of those things. So that's the worst. Not that it's a competition, it's just the reality of it.
So you're saying people of color at the bottom have it worse than white people at the bottom?
No, I'm not saying, well, in some ways, yes, but I'm saying more often than not, it is people of color, black people, who are at the bottom of everything, including birth rates for women, including, as you talked about, including suicide, including all aspects.
Not suicide.
Including obesity. Usually every aspect of society, black people are at the bottom because of the history of the country and other things as well. So, when you say that, that it's worse, Of course, we're looking at the worst aspects because they're trying to get people to the best.
There are always going to be disparities in society. My argument is that we should hone in on the actual proxy for disadvantage, right? Because black people are more likely to, say, go to prison than white people, does that mean that therefore our policy should be based on race as opposed to based on who is most likely to go to prison?
No, we should look at why that is, right?
Well, sure, but in terms of the priorities, right? If you're in an ER, you triage according to who needs the help right now, right? You don't look at their skin color. You look at the underlying correlates of the problem, right? You go, who is bleeding? We're gonna help you first, right? So my argument is that the closest proxy for who is bleeding right now in American society is the cluster of class variables I'm talking about, and not race.
Well, you mentioned prison, and look, some of the stats that I have here, and I would love for you to respond to this. You said the real issue are economics and class. So I want to take a look at the incarceration rates for you. Poverty rates, for example, 7 million black Americans are currently living in poverty compared to over 22 million white Americans living in poverty, 3 times as many white Americans, right? If race represented no aspect of this issue, then why is that? Why are more black people in prison and suffering the consequences than whites if it is based on socioeconomics?
So why, I don't exactly understand the question. You're saying if it were based on socioeconomics, then we would see equal incarceration rates
or no,
across the
everything's
board.
not going to be equal, but it would seem that it would be at least a bit more level than it is.
I'm not sure why that would necessarily follow, because crime doesn't necessarily just flow from socioeconomic issues. It has, you've seen at the turn of the 20th century, you had some white ethnic groups that had crime rates 10 times higher than other white ethnic groups from Europe, right? That has been the norm throughout multi-ethnic societies, is that for various reasons, in terms of geographic, cultural, age-based, black people are on average 10 years younger.
But it's so skewed. I believe it's 1 in 9 black men and 1 in 106 white men who are incarcerated. And that's why when you talk about socioeconomics, I'm wondering why race isn't a factor when I say both, because you don't think race plays into that? You don't think that, we know that black men and black people get harsher sentences. They end up going to jail or going to prison more often than not for the same offenses as white Americans. Why aren't both things a factor? Why isn't race and why isn't socioeconomics an issue? Why aren't they equally treated, or why aren't you looking at both?
So my view is that we have to make the criminal justice system colorblind, right? Like actually colorblind. In my book, I give the example of red light cameras and traffic cameras, where instead of a cop pulling you over, giving you a ticket, you can have a camera that does it in a totally colorblind way. Because a camera actually can't racial profile, right? And this is a good system because it completely takes the cop's potential error and everything that can happen between a cop and a person that can make a situation terrible. It takes that completely out of the equation and actually makes the distribution colorblind. And even when you do that, you're not necessarily going to see the same rates of speeding across every race.
Right. But it seems like you're making the point for me, because you're saying that the camera is colorblind, but people aren't, right? The police officer isn't.
That's right. But I'm making the further point that even when you make the system colorblind, you're not going to see the same offending rates,
right,
but with each race. The black homicide rate is something like 7 times higher than the white homicide rate. The white homicide rate is much higher than the Asian homicide rate. And this goes across the board for every crime you can imagine has different racial disproportions. In a city like New York, it's like year in, year out, you have a situation where 90 to 95% of shootings are blacks and Hispanics, perpetrated and suffered. And so in that context, even if you shake all the last remnants of racial bias out of the system, you're still going to see vastly disproportionate rates of incarceration. And that's why we have to talk about the real issue, which is how do we help disadvantaged kids, the kids that are most prone to crime, the most tempted by crime because they have to grow up in situations that I didn't have to. How do we help those kids from the ages 0 to 18 to have a better life?
I think everyone will agree with that. But when you look at, people, when people talk about black on black crime or whatever, you're talking about the homicide rate, people tend to kill people, or you face crime from the people you live near. It's proximity, right?
Yeah.
White people commit crimes mostly against white people. Black
Correct.
people commit crimes mostly against black people, simply because of proximity.
That's right. But I'm not talking about the black on black aspect or the white on white aspect. You're completely right there. The problem is the fundamental disproportion in the crime rate itself. Black people at 13% of the population committing something like and suffering something like 50% of the homicides according to the FBI Unified Crime Report. That's a huge disproportion. Right?
So do you think that...
And that's going to be reflected in who goes to prison.
Considering how you feel about colorblindness in society and looking at socioeconomics, do you think that America is prepared to do that? Do you think that, regardless, black people, white people, Latino, Asian, do you think America, the system, the way it's set up, is prepared to do that, is able to do that?
Able to do...
To correct as you said, the way that we look at fixing inequities in society instead of looking at race.
Sadly, I'm not optimistic about it, I have to say, because on the right, I don't think that there is very little political will to look into the situation at all. I think a lot of Republicans have a mindset which says essentially, I'm not going to get black votes anyway. Why? It's not my issue. I'm going to focus on the things that matter to my constituents more so, which is various other issues, right?
I don't know if that's happening in the presidential race now, because I want to talk to you about that, because
it's maybe maybe an exception. Maybe things are changing.
Yeah.
And then among Democrats, obviously many of these problems are taking place in Democrat-controlled areas where Democrats may take for granted the voters that they're getting.
Vote, yeah.
And also, really the crux of the issue is that the time that you can most intervene in someone's life is 0 to 18, in my view. And I think there's a lot of research to support that. It's not to say you're doomed once you're 18 necessarily, but really where you can have the highest impact is those early years. And kids don't vote, and politicians are less responsive to the needs of people who don't vote. So we end up talking and arguing about these post-18 controversial policies, DEI in corporate America, affirmative action in college admissions, and so forth, when they're all kind of a distraction from the crux of the issue, which is how do we help people between the ages of 0 and 18 when we can help them the most?
So you mentioned, let's go to the voting thing, because if you look at the latest polls, Donald Trump, who is a Republican, a MAGA Republican, right? Most people deem him sort of far-right Republican. He seems to be gaining ground, especially among black men. What do you attribute that to? Why do you think that is?
So initially, I've entertained all of the theories on this, and what it seems to be, I think, is that there is a trend, especially among black men my age, younger black men, away from the Democratic Party in general. Now, it's not a huge trend; it's not a flood per se, but it's more than a trickle. And
they say they like him, but does that necessarily mean they're going to vote for him? But go on.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I think there's a baseline thing. How many times have we all been fooled by polls, right? Mm-hmm. So we don't really know what's going to happen yet. But there is a trend, specifically among younger black men under 30, under 40, away from Democrats towards Republicans. I'm not sure that it has as much to do with Biden or Trump as people may think. It might be partly people are turned off by Biden. There's a lot of reasons to be turned off. He's looking older and older every day. He's not quite looking the same as he was in 2020. There's been issues with inflation and so forth. There's just the fact that the way the Democratic Party talks about race sends a message that racism is everywhere, racism is going to hold you back. And there's a certain subset of young black men that are turned off by this because what they would rather hear is, the world is your oyster, get up and work, you can be anything you want. A lot of young men like a more empowering message, and I think increasingly, especially since 2020, the Democratic Party has turned off some of them, and so they're driven to the alternative.
You think that message is coming from the party? Because the message that you can be anything came from my family and people around me. I didn't look to a political party for that.
Yes, but if a political party was telling you the opposite, it might have turned you off.
You think the Democratic Party is telling that to black men?
Sure. I mean, the wider. I mean, look at Biden's Morehouse speech. He says you have to work 10 times harder. Now, you and I both know the saying is actually twice as hard to get half as far, right? Biden eclipsed that. He said you have to work 10 times as hard to achieve the same thing as a white person. Which,
well, that's not scientific. You know, it's a figure of speech. You get.
I know
it,
it's a figure of speech, but
you think it's hyperbole.
It's absolutely hyperbole. But it's sending a signal, which is racism is everywhere. This is going to be a huge barrier for you, and some people like hearing that. But there is a subset of especially young male voters that don't like hearing that. They actually prefer to hear, get up off your ass and work, you can do anything. Because it's a more empowering message. It resonates with that subset. And I get that. And I think that subset is who you're seeing turned off to the Democratic Party right now. Now, my view is that it's not that they like Trump so much. You know, my view is that it's the push factors away from Democrats and Biden as opposed to pull factors towards Trump. And my view is also that I don't think it will amount to more than a 1 or 2% gain for Trump in the black vote in this election.
Explain the get up off your ass and work thing. What does that mean?
It means that you can emphasize in life, no matter what your circumstance, you can always emphasize one of two things. You can emphasize the ways in which you are disadvantaged, or you can emphasize what the psychologists call locus of control, the sense that you are in control of your own fate, which can act like a cattle prod for you to work harder, for you to want to work harder.
Ultimately, you are in control of your own fate, but
they're not mutually exclusive. They're not mutually exclusive, but you can say both at once, but in practice, some people really respond well to the one and some people respond well to the other. And especially since 2020, I think the Democratic Party has been leaning very heavily into a message to the black community of emphasize the disadvantaged, racism. And there's a certain subset of people that don't respond well to that are not empowered by that, and prefer a message that emphasizes, well, look how many successful black people are. Look how many more black millionaires there are now 10 years ago. Nobody can stop you. Actually, there's massive opportunity here. Look at the fact that this is the #1 destination for the black migrants of the world. Like, this is a message that is not coming from the Democratic Party, and I think it turns some people off.
I understand everything that you're saying. I think that, and obviously, you have been very successful. I've been very successful, and I understand that. And I've had people in my life who tell me you can do anything, you can be anything or whatever. Also within reason, right? Mm-hmm. I can't be a rocket scientist because I know what my skills are. But when you say those things, do you understand that some people will say, well, you're ignoring other realities like racism, etc., that do factor into someone's trajectory of success?
Yes, I understand that people would say that, and you can say both at once. But the fact of the matter is, I believe that racism will never be fully eradicated. Mm-hmm. I believe that it is not an American sin so much as a human sin. And the more one studies the world and travels the world, the more one sees that a certain element of humanity will always be bigoted. And that to focus on that to the exclusion of what's really unique about America, which is that one of the few places in the world and in human history where you actually can come here with nothing and your kids can go to Harvard. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's, your kids can become part of the elite. That is actually what's unusual if you look at the whole world. That's what stands out. Stands out is not racism. There's racism everywhere. And so I would argue it's actually a better focus and a better message for kids of color, for disadvantaged kids, to emphasize what is possible as opposed to, and be realistic about what they may face, but to emphasize the other side of the coin.
All right, when you're talking about the emphasis that Democrats put on, you said racism or what have you, or what holds people back, do you think there's a message for Republicans that could be more positive in order to draw people of color in instead of pushing them away by saying, we shouldn't talk about race, it's over. Slavery was years ago, Jim Crow, blah, 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 the civil rights movement, everybody's equal now, which is not exactly true. Do you think there's a better message for Republicans, since you said that Democrats have the wrong message?
Yeah, the better message for Republicans would be to try to make really serious and earnest attempts to come up with public policy plans and solutions for the problems that that Black voters care about.
Such as, what do you mean by that?
Well, rather than merely, criticizing Democrat-controlled inner cities, it's like, what is your plan for really fixing it? Go to those places, talk to people, and do serious outreach, have serious plans. And I would argue, I would also say, try not to needlessly offend on issues of great narrative and spiritual importance to Black Americans.
That's a message.
Yeah. And I think, so, I mean, like I said, this is the problem. Is one side Republicans have no reason to care about this issue, and Democrats, you're getting the votes on this issue, but either you take them for granted, or you just aren't actually incentivized to really dig in and solve them.
What do you say Republicans don't have an incentive to care about these issues?
Well, they in theory, they have an incentive to care, right? Because what I mean is, I think they've given up on getting the Black vote, right? Rather than say, okay, we've got 90% of Black people voting for Democrats. How do we get this back to 50-50 or even claw it to 30-60? I think many of them have just said, it's impossible, I give up. And I understand that mindset too, because it's I mean, look how much we're talking about a tiny trend towards the Republican vote amongst Black voters. It's a very daunting task. How does a Republican get Black people to switch parties?
Well, it's not just Black people, it's people of color. I mean, I don't know if did you see the thing with Ann Coulter and Vivek Ramaswamy? She said, I just wouldn't vote for you because you're Indian.
That's insane.
American.
I mean, it's insane. I think it's crazy that he just let her say that and didn't. I mean, look, of all the reasons not to vote for Vivek Ramaswamy, him being Indian is absolutely at the lowest. But I mean, how can that be the reason you don't want to vote for the guy? There may be other reasons, no doubt, but look, he's a smart guy. He's a very successful person. To just dismiss him on the count of his race, it's classic, pure bigotry.
But I'm using that example to make a larger point, because that's how people feel about the Republican Party, that the Republican Party feels that way about people of color. That I'm not going to vote for you because you're Black, I'm not going to vote for you because you're Indian, I'm not going to vote for you because of your religion. But you and I are talking about color. I'm making a larger point about the Republican Party.
I don't think that's a typical Republican voter.
You don't?
I think that's probably a fringe 15 to 20% of the Republican Party, and the other 80%, I think, would be fine voting for, and have been fine voting for Black candidates. There are plenty of successful Black Republicans in the past 50 years that have been elected by those very Republicans, those very Republican voters. So I don't think that Ann Coulter speaks for Republican voters on that front.
That's not fringe, 20%.
No, it's not. Well, it's big. I mean, I'm taking this from polls, okay? Right. So you look at the General Social Survey. This is somewhat dated. This is probably 10-year-old data at this point, but you will find 15 to 20% of Republicans, of white Republicans rather, so not all Republicans, will say frankly racist things, like will agree with racist statements. I don't want my kid marrying a Black person, something like that. So you're talking about 15 to 20% of white Republicans. You're talking about, therefore, maybe 8% of the country. Now, my view, again, is if you look throughout history, throughout the world, it's hard to get bigotry to lower levels than that. because it never zeroes out. That's the fact of the matter. And we've done a very good job in America of stigmatizing bigotry. Not a perfect job by any stretch, but we've done a very good job of it, such that open expressions of hatred for other races are considered beyond the pale generally. And we have to keep remaining vigilant about that, because things can come back.
That's not a reason to give up, right? Just because you think
always
it's
remain
never
vigilant.
going to be eradicated.
Always remain vigilant.
Completely. So you're an independent, right? You don't belong to a political party. I don't belong to a political party either, but mostly because I'm just not political. I mean, I know that's hard to believe for people. I just happen to sit in a seat.
I don't believe that for a second.
I just happen to sit in a seat where you have to talk about politics. If I didn't do this job, I would not talk about politics.
Interesting.
Right, and especially because Trump has been the news, right, for the past almost decade. So I had to talk about politics, but I'm not political at all. But I'm just wondering, would you feel comfortable in any political party? You're an independent. I think at this point in history, I would feel more comfortable if I had to pick a political party, it would be as a Democrat. I would not feel comfortable being a Republican right now because of the MAGA aspect of the party. Would you feel comfortable being, if you had to be a member of a political party right now, which one would you choose?
If I had to choose, gun to my head?
If you had to choose, yeah.
Oh Lord, that's a very good question. I honestly don't know. I mean, like you, I have no sympathy for the MAGA wing of the Republican Party. I think that they beclown themselves. January 6th was absolutely shameful, and I think actually more shameful than the events of that day were everything Donald Trump did in the month prior to try to pressure and shake down his various Republican officials to find the votes and all that. It's all terrible.
It's not really
on the other hand,
it's not a wing. I mean, it is the Republican Party right now. Do you disagree with that?
Trump through his success has taken over a huge swath of the Republican Party through his cult of personality. That there's no doubt about that. But to me, I am also deeply disturbed by the trends on the left wing of the Democratic Party too.
That's all well and good, and I believe you. There are reasons for all of it, but if you gun to your head, what would you do? I hate to say gun to your head. I don't like that.
Truthfully, I am an undecided voter in this election. I mean, I can't really picture myself voting for Trump, but I'm genuinely undecided in this election. So
let me tell you why.
I guess kill me.
Let me tell you why. You should kill me. Let me tell you why I feel that way. I think, honestly, if I can be honest with you, I don't want to insult you. I feel like that's a cop-out because I may not agree with what Democrats are doing, and I don't in a lot of aspects, but they believe in democracy. The intentions are good. Sometimes they go overboard with things that people consider woke, the term that's been co-opted. I think on the Republican side of the party, they don't believe in democracy. They have racist tendencies. They have homophobic tendencies. Donald Trump insults everyone, and they make excuses for him. I'd rather at least be in a party, if I had to choose. I don't have to be in one, so I choose not to. But if I had to choose one, I'd rather be in a party that stood up for democracy and is at least trying to do, whether the messaging is wrong, trying to do the right things for the underserved people of our country. Do you understand that?
I do understand that. I mean, I take a much more cynical view of the Democratic Party, of both parties, but you also take a cynical view of the Republicans, is my point. I'm not sure that Democrats care about democracy per se. I think because Trump is the enemy, that Democrats have been able to effectively wield caring about democracy as a political cudgel, because Donald Trump cares so little. I mean, Stacey Abrams denied that she lost the Georgia election for years, and I didn't see anyone caring about democracy.
That's problematic, at that point. But people aren't marching on the Capitol and breaking into the Capitol because of Stacey Abrams. It's not.
No,
and Democrats look at Stacey Abrams as a cult figure, as a deity almost. I mean, there's a difference.
Well, Republicans look at Trump as a deity, but this is my point. If there were a principal difference in caring about democracy, you would have seen Democrats in 2018 say, "What is she doing? She's denying the results of an election."
Well, there were Democrats who said that.
Well, very few, very, very few. I mean,
But
the New York Times certainly didn't care.
She's not in office.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but
Yeah.
your point was that one party cares about democracy, the other doesn't. My point is that one party has Donald Trump who cares about it less than anyone, and so the other party has been effectively wielded caring about democracy as a political cudgel.
But maybe a better way of putting it.
I don't think there's a huge principle difference.
Maybe a better way of putting it, at least operating in the bounds of a democracy, right?
Sure.
Wanting to keep the democracy
There's no
going.
question that Biden is 1,000 times better on that score of caring about democracy than Trump, if we're going to compare the specific candidates. There's no doubt. I just don't think there's a big difference in the party principles.
Okay, all right. In interviews, you've cited the year 2013 as a pivoting point for American race relations, and that they have plummeted since. Why do you think this has occurred in 2013? Why is that a pivotal year for you?
Yeah, well, it's worth going back to, just to trace for people the trend, going back to the 90s, basically since the time I was born, 96, every year was better than the last for American race relations, which is to say, every year from 96 to 2013, more and more Americans of all races said race relations were good, to the point where in 2013 you had a majority of white, black, and Hispanic Americans saying race relations are good. Not only that, every year after year, fewer and fewer black Americans were saying racial bias was a big issue in their lives, to the point where in 2013 you had like 60% of black Americans saying racial bias was not the main issue they faced. So the country was inching and inching and inching towards a place that we should all want to go, and then it all changed in 2013. So the question is, what happened? Republicans like to blame Obama. I don't think Obama had anything to do with it. Democrats like to blame Trump, but the trend started before him, so it doesn't make sense either. What happened, I think, is that 2013 was around the year that everyone got a camera-enabled smartphone and social media, and that fundamentally changed how information spread, and it changed the information that was getting to all of our brains. So, for example, and this is something I realize like Gen Z is too young to remember this probably, but if something happened in 2006, a cop pulled over a black suspect, right? A white cop pulled over a black suspect, the interaction went left, and there was a violent altercation of some kind in Kansas City. How would you know about that? Well, it'd be in the Kansas City local newspaper the next day.
Kansas City Star.
It could be in the Kansas City Star the next day. It would be on the 6 o'clock, the local 6 o'clock news the next day. And by the time the locals heard about it, there would be journalists to ask the police side of the story, the family side of the story, and to surround it with some journalistic context, right? Let's say the same thing happens in 2013, 2014. Now, someone was probably filming it a minute after it started, perhaps out of context at the beginning of the interaction, immediately uploads it to Facebook without any journalistic context surrounding it, where it gets millions of views within a few hours.
So it's phones and social media.
And then you have algorithms that preferentially show that to the people most likely to get angered by it. This is a fundamental change in the way information spreads. And as a result of that, people got the false impression that racism was on the rise, white supremacy was on the rise. It was open season on the police killing unarmed black people.
How is it a false impression? Couldn't it be just awareness? Couldn't the phones have just made people aware of what was out there, and all of a sudden they said, well, I didn't know all this crap was going on. So
absolutely,
wouldn't that change anybody's mind?
It is possible, but it happens not to be true. And the way we know that is because if that were true, you would expect people who consume social media to be informed on these issues, right? If it's teaching you something. But I cite one study in my book, which asked, in 2019, it asked liberal Americans, who are the most online contingent, how many unarmed black people do you think were killed by the police this year? And they answered 1,000. The true answer that year was 12. Okay, so it's not that the social media smartphones are educating us, making us more accurate about what's going on in the world. It's actually miseducating us.
But it's also educating us not just about black people in police and just police treatment in general, right?
Yeah, well, it is making us aware of high-profile incidents that aren't representative, but in doing that, it's creating a false narrative. It's giving people a false impression that that problems are that white supremacy is a resurgent, huge problem in the country, that again, the police that is open season on unarmed Black Americans and so forth. There's a Republican version of this as well, which is, you'll see some video of undocumented immigrant robbing a store, right? Mm-hmm. And these videos are constantly promoted into your timeline, and therefore creates this impression that there's an epidemic of illegal immigrant crime, when in reality, you look at the numbers, it may not be, it might be 1/10 the issue you think it is. I'm not saying it's not an issue. But this has created a kind of alarmism in our society, and the version it took on the left was an alarmism about racist police. And so, and this, in 2013, this opened the door to all of the whole decline in race relations that has then happened.
Okay, let me jump in here, because the video or the phone, that's not just in a vacuum. This phone it doesn't talk, right? So someone is spreading that message. Could it be a product of our politics rather than just people being aware? I think people should be aware. I don't see anything wrong with people becoming aware about mistreatment of anybody, of any race, of any ethnicity, of any background. Don't you think that it's not the phone, it's the people who are out there spreading the message? It's the politicians, it's the media, it's people who want to take advantage?
No, I really think it's the technology, like when I think it's commonplace for historians to say that when the printing press came to Europe, it had massive effects in terms of creating violent sectarian wars, and like when technology and the way information changes, when the way information spreads fundamentally changes, that can have really crazy downstream effects on societies that aren't used to that technological change.
I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying, but isn't that an argument though for media literacy rather than the technology, is what I'm saying?
Yeah, we have to reboot and find a culture of media literacy. We have to somehow change our culture to adapt to the weapons we all have in our pockets.
So we're going from printing press to the phone, right? That's right.
And well, TV changed politics too.
Right.
Absolutely, the television changed politics. The Vietnam War went very differently, I think, than it would have if there were no television for Americans to see war. As was the case during World War II. So technology can have a huge impact, and technology is the main cause, social media and smartphones, of the decline in race relations in America over the past 10 years.
I do agree with you. I think social media plays a big role in that, because things just go unchecked on social media. You see video of people fighting, and depending on it can look like black people are beating up only white people, or white people are beating up only black people. When you see the fight videos,
and you see this on Twitter now. There are some accounts that just all day post videos of black people committing crimes, and you can play. There's enough content in the world that you can play this game in any direction, right? But this is where people are getting their worldview now, just from algorithmically boosted content on social media.
You're at Columbia, right?
I graduated a few years ago.
You graduated a few years ago. I'm wondering what you think of the protests that had happened a couple weeks ago, and they're still happening in other campuses across the country.
Sure. Well, I fully support freedom of speech. I'm pretty close to an absolutist on freedom of speech. I think kids should be able to say pretty much what they want to say, as long as you're not following a student, yelling at a student at close range, harassing, and that sort of thing. I think they should be able to chant radical slogans, river to the sea, and so forth. In fact, when I was at Columbia,
they should be able to do that?
Yeah, I think they should be able to peacefully chant almost any slogan.
I don't like when people
even if
do
it's a slogan
things
I hate.
that are deemed to be racist or bigoted. But go on. That's just I'm here to
that's fair enough.
Hear what you have to say.
Well, if you're consistent about it, that's fine. Years ago, there was a kid named Julian Von Abele who went on this rant. He was a white kid. He went on a rant outside Butler Library saying he loves white people and he loves being white. And he was careful to say he didn't hate anyone else. He just said, I love being white. White people, we built civilization. We're fantastic. I don't hate you. I just love me. And the video went viral on campus. He got banned from Barnard's campus as a result, even though it happened at Columbia. And at the time, I defended his free speech rights too. So I feel I have I give a very wide berth for what you should be allowed to say. I know not everyone feels that way. So now that said, what you can't do is take over a zone of campus and say, we're not allowing Zionists in. You don't have the right to do that as a student. You can't create a little zone on campus and bar people of a political persuasion. Imagine if you did that. Oh, okay, the northwest side of campus is not open for socialists. If you're a socialist, we're going to form a human link chain and prevent you from coming. You can't do that. Absolutely can't do that. And I think that should be disciplined to the full extent of Columbia University policy, in addition to smashing windows, taking over buildings. I have no sympathy for that style of protest.
I think we agree on everything except when you said that people have. I believe you're right. I believe that people have the right to be able to say things that are hurtful, right? But where I think I draw the line is where it leads to violence. That's it. So if you want to chant from the river to the sea, if that's not causing violence, and so be it. I don't like it. Most people don't like it. I think it's, there's an issue with it. If you call someone a name, the N-word or what have you, then I think that's problematic. As long as it doesn't lead to violence or it doesn't threaten someone's safety, then hey,
Right.
I agree with you.
But the problem has been that over the past 10 years, universities have basically shown that elite universities have shown that they are completely inconsistent about this issue, which is to say, when the white conservative kid says something approaching the line, he is going to get punished. He's going to get shouted down. He's going to get disciplined. But when the pro-Palestinian protesters say something analogous or maybe even more extreme, the kids are going to be given a wide berth, right, and negotiated with.
I don't know if that's true because I watched what happened at Ole Miss, and those kids, the frat guys, did not get in trouble for what they were saying.
Well, I'm talking about elite. I'm talking about Ivy League universities. That's what I said.
Ole Miss.
Yeah.
But this whole idea that you and I are talking about freedom of speech. Do you know who Floyd Abrams is? Right. He's one of the top First Amendment attorneys in the country. He said this has nothing to do with freedom of speech, especially among private universities.
Right.
Freedom of speech is keeps the government from being able to stop you. Right.
Right.
It's like government can create no law, right, to inhibit your freedom of speech. What's happening on college campuses, are you being able to scream something that's hateful or whatever, is absolutely nothing to do with freedom of speech, and that college campuses have the right to be able to conduct business. So if you are inhibiting people from going to class or from learning or from conducting the business of their everyday business, which they are mandated to do, they have the right to stop you. It has absolutely nothing to do with freedom of speech. You're not curtailing your freedom of speech.
Right. Yeah. I agree with that. Definitely in the case of a private university. I'm curious what would he say about one that receives public funding? He
says that public universities, I'm paraphrasing, they agree to act within the spirit of the First Amendment.
Right.
But they don't actually have to as well.
They don't actually have to.
No.
Right. No. And because they're not.
So I think people don't look at what the definition of freedom of speech is, and they say when you're on social media and someone moderates you or removes a comment, oh my gosh, you are censoring me. You're taking away my freedom of speech. You're not. It's a private platform.
Yeah.
And you have to conduct yourself as if you were coming into a private business. So it has I think we need to really figure out, I think people need to read the definition of freedom of speech.
Oh, for sure. But I think also universities have to have a consistent set of books.
Right. They
can't treat pro-Palestinian protesters one way. I mean, how would they have treated anti-BLM protesters? I think anyone really paying attention knows that many of these same Ivy League elite college administrations would not have treated protesters the same if they were chanting "All Lives Matter" or something like that. They would have had a very short fuse. And that's
for
the
All
problem.
Lives Matter. I don't know.
Or let's say something more extreme.
If something more extreme, I understand. But for All Lives Matter, I don't think
something Charlottesville-esque.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean, look,
they would have had a very short fuse.
Well, I mean, Charlottesville. I say that we're going back to what we said. People have the right to be able to say hateful things, right? It doesn't mean that you like it. In Charlottesville, they said, Jews will not replace us. They got a permit. They were able to do it, and until there was violence, until Heather Heyer got killed, they had the right to protest.
Right. And that's America.
And nobody said no.
Right.
Nobody tried to drive them out. So,
right. That's not on a college campus, obviously.
Yeah, but still. right?
Yeah.
It is in a public place. It's in a park, you know?
Sure. I mean, I think that at the end of the day, these students, they feel that the Israel-Palestine issue is analogous to South African apartheid, analogous to the black-white issue in America. That's why they care about it. They think it's an example, a simple example of colonizer, oppressor versus oppressed, and they're voicing their opinion. I strongly disagree with them about that issue, but I think they should be allowed to chant and do everything up to violence and creating zones and this kind of crazy stuff.
Let me ask you, I said that sometimes I feel like I don't have a home because sometimes the left doesn't like me, sometimes the right doesn't like me, right? You can't go on every, there are media organizations that won't invite you on. Mm-hmm. Why not?
Well, I think for some I'm viewed as, especially in places that have black audiences, sometimes I'm viewed as a race traitor or an Uncle Tom. And so that can be a reason to not engage with me. Others, I suspect it's because, there are places that would invite someone like Candace Owens on, but would not invite me, I think, because someone like Candace Owens, in my view, she's so clearly operating in partisan bad faith that they, MSNBC might have fun, beating up on her a little bit. Whereas I think it's actually harder to engage with a point of view that is, I really am coming to these conversations in good faith, whether you agree or not. Mm-hmm. I'm not trying to, I'm not a flamethrower. I'm someone that you have to contend with. And I think that is uncomfortable for a certain kind of partisan left-wing outlet that only wants to deal with the worst of the other side of a topic, right? And I think that's part of part of what's so frustrating about the media landscape is a lot of what people are getting in their social media feed is just the worst of the left meeting the worst of the right.
Yeah. So are you saying that you mentioned MSNBC? You think Candace Owens would be invited on MSNBC?
Well, I don't know. That may not be the best example.
Have you been on?
I have not been on.
Have you been asked to be on?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
But would you go on?
Yeah, sure, of course. Actually, I actually couldn't.
All right, because you work for CNN now.
Yeah.
So then why do you think that Candace Owens is operating in bad faith? Why do you say that?
Oh, I mean, there's a million reasons. I think it's been obvious for years that she doesn't care about having any factual basis or evidence for what she says.
Are you calling her a grifter?
I mean, I don't know how else to phrase it. I mean, that's not my word, but ultimately, I don't really know what motivates people. I'm not in anyone's head. But when you see someone just consistently not care about she literally got on Joe Rogan years ago, and she said, I don't believe in climate change. And Joe says, why do you think that? She goes, oh, that's just my opinion. I mean, can you imagine having a take like that, and then when asked a simple question to back it up, having literally nothing other than your gut? So we're talking about a person.
I've interviewed someone recently who's very similar, but go on.
My thing is, you're allowed to get things wrong.
Right.
Everyone gets things wrong.
Right.
I'm going to look back on my career and realize I got certain things wrong.
Right.
You're not allowed to not care about whether you're wrong.
Right.
Okay. That puts you in a totally different category for me as a bad faith actor. And to me, it's been obvious that Candace Owens is that pretty much since the beginning. Yeah. For some people, it's only becoming obvious in the past year. I don't know what's changed. To me, she's looked pretty much the same since the start.
You said the word Uncle Tom. It's and such. I hate that term. I hate calling anybody that term. What do you do? Does that offend you? Does that hurt you?
No. I don't like it. I don't like being called names. It makes me sad more than it hurts me because whoever is calling me that, it means they're not even giving my message a chance. Mm-hmm. They're playing a kind of race traitor and race loyalty game, which emotionally I understand where it comes from, but it also represents a closing of your mind as a black person to even the potential of arguments that don't feel right to you.
Well, you know, a lot of African Americans, from what I've read, and I don't know, it's not scientific, they feel like you have been co-opted by the right. Is that a fair assessment?
I mean, that's what Sonny Hostin said on The View, and you know what I replied is, there's just no evidence that I have been co-opted, right? I'm independent. I work for CNN. I write for the Free Press, but I'm independent in all of those endeavors. I'm not getting pumped Koch brothers money to say what I'm saying. I really feel what I feel, and there's just no evidence I've been co-opted. I don't know how to persuade someone other than to say that.
You said you may look back on your career and say, "Oh, I got something wrong."
I'm sure.
And if you do, what if that happens? What would you do? You think?
I very much hope I would have the character to be honest about it. Yeah.
I appreciated talking to you. I love that you said. I think that you wrote that people should not be afraid of uncomfortable conversations. Right? Am I correct in that?
Sure. Yeah. That sounds like something I might say.
Yeah. I didn't think this was uncomfortable, but I thought that you were very candid, and I really appreciate you.
Appreciate it, Don. Yeah.
Thank you so
pleasure.
much. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for watching The Don Lemon Show. Make sure you click on the image in the top right to subscribe to my channel and the thumbnail in the bottom right to watch more content from my show. And I'll see you next time.